Okay, so I have a question for this. So do you think that game journalists should ever talk about politics and religious beliefs? The reason why I bring this up because recently, I'm not sure if you heard of this, the Scott Coffin incident,
I've
where
heard the name. I don't know the details though.
well, essentially his who he his charities, where he's sent his money to politically, where he sent his money to has been exposed. That's been exposed, and of course, a lot of game journalists wrote hit pieces saying that Scott Cawthon he's a bigot because he supports this so and so group or whatever this Republican Democrat. I'm not too sure
Okay,
on the
okay,
details.
okay. Okay, I have the broader strokes because I basically studied this story for a while. But
Okay.
essentially, the political affiliation of Scott Cawthon essentially was leaked, quote unquote, by essentially publicizing the places he has been donating money to, and most of the places Scott Cawthon has spent his money. And by the way, Scott Cawthon is the creator of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise.
Hmm.
Okay, but yeah, back to the subject. Um, essentially, the people, essentially, the political affiliation of those charities and places he has and trust funds and stuff was essentially associated with Trump
Hmm.
and the Trump administration. And
Okay.
because of that, people essentially started calling him a bigot and, essentially forced him to retire because they essentially started sending death threats to his actual family and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's just overboard in my opinion. As soon as you involve someone's family, like you can criticize someone's political leanings if you want. Like I think that people should be allowed to do that for sure. But as soon as you start like attacking their family, then no. It's basically a matter of politics is fine if you want to write about it, even if you're like a games journalist. I'm not one of those people that says you should never talk about politics ever. Because I do it, everybody does it, and it's going to happen naturally. So that's fine. It's just like, here's an example. So there was, I think it was from Kotaku, I don't know, but there was a PS5 review. I think it was Kotaku. And in the PS5 review, there was this giant section about how the world is awful and Biden's finally president, but he's an old white man, so he sucks. And all the bigots are still going to reign free in America. And COVID is making it impossible to afford anything, so it sucks. So I was like, oh my God. And it just goes on and on and on. And it's just about politics and nihilism, and it's awful. That has no place in a PS5 review, right? That's not going to tell you if the exclusives are good. That's not going to tell you if the hardware is functional. That's not going to tell you if it's going to overheat, when you use it a certain way. Yeah, and it was a large section too. People were like, "Oh, it's just a few paragraphs." I was like, "Yeah, it was a few paragraphs. Like that's a lot. That's a lot in the grand scheme of things." Or like there was another one that had to do with like trypophobia. It's just like some writer's phobia of the holes in the Xbox.
Xbox Series X.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a place if you want to talk about that. Let's say in some major publisher there's an executive and he's making sure to deny everyone employment that doesn't agree with him politically. Well, you can go in and you can discuss politics and say this guy's politics, right? Because he has these political beliefs and these leanings, they're affecting the workplace, and this is what, and you can put your own opinion in there, right? It's a topic that's about the games industry. It's gaming journalism 101, right? Like it's covering the publishers and the companies that work in this, but there's going to be politics involved. But when you weasel it into every single thing, that's when people are like, no, there's no place for this. Like if you're doing a review of a game, like let's say you're reviewing Candy Crush, and you're like, well, there's way too many red bubbles, and I don't like the fact that they're red, and I think there should be more blue bubbles because America is divided into white, red, and blue, and then the red and the blue don't get along, and you can twist it into politics. And I think that's what happens too often, and people just get really, really pissed off about it.
Okay, so it's not it's not the okay. So discussing it is not the problem. It's just them going overboard is the problem.
Yeah, and like finding every single thing they can to put it in. Like they'll take something that is objectively apolitical and make it political. Now that's fair in some categories, right? Because Ubisoft has this game where they launched it. I forget what it was called. It's something in like it's a Tom Clancy thing, I think. But anyway, basically, it was a mobile game. They had this enemy that was like some kind of underground activist terrorist group. And okay,
I know it. I know the name
yeah,
of it.
that one. But you know the game I'm talking about, right? Even if we forget the name,
Yeah,
that was okay. The bad guy was BLM. Let's be honest. They
yeah.
basically structured the bad guy as Black Lives Matter, and during the whole activist thing. And I was like, okay, Ubisoft, you can't say you're apolitical if you're doing this. So in that sense, you can talk about politics when you're writing about that game. I mean,
And
I
it's
did a video
fun.
on it. I was like, Ubisoft, you can't avoid politics. You can't say you're avoiding politics and then make a game like this. And like that was filled with politics. Like you can find games journalists can write articles that are deeply meaningful and highly pertinent that contain tons of politics and political leanings and commentary and subjective opinion. But it's happening in spaces where it doesn't need to and shouldn't happen, and it's happening too often, and it's too like charged. That's my opinion, anyways.
Elite Squad was the name of it.
Yeah, that one, and it was like straight. They didn't even try to mask it. They used the black fist that BLM
Yeah.
uses as the logo. Like it was
And-
so
and-
obvious.
And the name of the organization was Umbra.
Yeah, Umbra, right? Yeah, and Umbra is like another word for dark or black or shadow or something. It was just it was so on the nose, and it was like you can't pretend to be apolitical, Ubisoft, because you're absolutely political. And I can picture if someone from I don't even know if this got picked up. I mean, I know I covered it, and it probably got covered by some other people, but I don't think it was like a mainstream gaming media story. But if it was, and it contained a whole bunch of political commentary, then yeah, I mean that's the place for it. That makes sense. But when you're like, oh, this PS5 is great, but Trump sucks, so you shouldn't buy one. It's like, what? What?
And another one of those kind of quote unquote memories that I have is when Ubisoft essentially kept boasting for Division 2 about how they will show us what a fucking quote unquote real government recession would look like.
Oh,
And then
they sent the
shortly
email.
after, They will immediately,
Yeah.
and then immediately they
Wait.
will immediately backtrack and say, "No, we're
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how, but they sent an email to like all of their subscribers that said, "Oh, come see what a real recession looks like, or what a real government shutdown looks like." And it happened right at the time when the U.S. government was shut down because I don't remember, there was some budget disagreement.
fuck.
Yeah, so they sent out this like, "Come see what a real government shutdown looks like." I was like, "Come on, guys!" Like somebody, I mean,
That
it
has
was
to be
funny,
intentional.
right? It was a little bit funny, and I'm sure someone there got fired over it. But I don't know. You can't claim to be apolitical as a publisher and then do it. And if you're writing about that, then yeah, it's gonna contain politics. And if someone from, let's say, Kotaku just went down the rabbit hole and discussed all the different political leanings and how the shutdown happened and when it was likely to end and why Ubisoft doing this was tasteless, I don't know, whatever they would say, then yeah, that's the time and place for it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say keep the politics out of games. Like, you can talk that. That's a gaming topic. I mean, it's tangentially related. It's not exactly about a video game, but there's plenty of opportunities. There really is. I did a whole thing about how games are amazingly political sometimes with the BioShock series, right? And it was about, what was it, eco-fascism and all the different stuff that they contain, and extreme nationalism and class warfare. And it was great. I mean, the BioShock games are amazing. It was a gaming topic, contained politics, and like there's going to be ways, if you want to write about politics, you can. It's just you can't shoehorn it into every single article.
I know exactly how controversial they are, but Jim Sterling also made a very amazing video talking about how Dark Souls is extremely is political by in nature, and they discussed many of the game's design choices in terms of the story, the characters, the lore, even to explain exactly how how Dark Souls was inherently political in nature. And it was actually really convincing. It was actually a really convincing video. So I agree with Operational's point that games can be political in certain ways when you actually look at them in a deeper spectrum. The problem is that most people aren't really looking for that kind of discussion. They're just looking for a fucking, like I said before, they're looking for something more superficial, more gossipy-like.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
also
I
weird
mean-
because it's on a razor's edge. One sec. It's on a razor's edge because on the one hand they'll say like they'll insert politics into everything, but on the other, a game like Far Cry 4, they'll be like, oh well, it doesn't take enough of a stand, it doesn't take enough of a stand because it doesn't demonize people hard enough that we think should be demonized, right? So it's not just inserting politics, it's demanding politics, and that's where it falls apart completely for me.
Yeah, and just to take a recent example, just look at Cyberpunk and how that's essentially a look at late stage capitalism, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cyberpunk has. There was a lot of stuff with Cyberpunk, yeah.
Many fronts. Oh my goodness! Are we talking about the game of the development?
Well, the developers, top to bottom, that game was mired in controversy. But see, some of it there. Okay, there was the one time where there was a gameplay demo and there was a picture, and the picture had an image of a trans woman. Yeah. But the point of the Cyberpunk universe is that the corporate structure like bastardizes and pollutes sexuality even just for the sake of marketing, right? Like you said, late stage capitalism, everything is about profit, and they pursue it to such a detrimental degree that they're kind of like objectifying and using this imagery in like a purely carnal way for like no, it's basically the corruption of society. Well, people took that and they're like, oh, it's so bad because it has this imagery and they're objectifying. I was like, that's the point. That's the point of the universe.
People miss the point entirely because the whole point was to warn people that this is where the world is heading. This is how we are developing as a society, and this is how we could end up, you know?
Exactly. It wasn't an endorsement of that. It was this, look, this is a bad, corporatized future. And people are like, oh, look, it's a bad corporatized future. Why are you doing that? Like, what? No, that's the point. Like, they wanted to do that, and they did a damn good job showing it, too, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Just real quick, by the way, don't try to fucking... and if you want to argue with Alex, may I remind you that she's a trans girl, so I'm pretty sure she knows exactly what she's talking about.
Yeah, I actually think Cyberpunk did a really good job portraying a trans character and how trans people could be exploited in the future, so I'm actually a huge fan of them.
Yeah. There's actually a game that's actually a very similar theme of Cyberpunk. It's like a horror visual novel. It had some backlash when Nintendo was advertising it. And it's interesting that even when this game was political, these characters on the front page are very sexualized. Like, they have like huge boobs. We're talking about like watermelons times two.
Oh, I remember the game.
Yeah, and the whole point. If people will automatically assume like, oh, you're just obviously just trying to do eye candy, this and that, but no, when you actually play the game, it addresses why people are like this. It's because, again, like Cyberpunk 2077 is being capitalized or purposely doing this.
Yeah,
it's to make a statement. So even when they're making a statement about over-sexualization in the future, some game journalists weren't happy about that, and they were claiming the opposite.
Yeah, and for anybody that's like brushed up on the lore and like is a really big fan of the Cyberpunk universe, the cybernetic enhancements and like the plastic surgery that they have can allow anyone to look like anything, basically. So when you have that limitation removed, like if I can look however I want, then it changes things, right? Like they're trying to sell the service of looking however you want. So people are gonna go down that rabbit hole of marketing, feeding personal choices, feeding back into marketing, and it's like this end point that is spiraled out of control. And so like it's all about taking advantage of and manipulating people for the sake of advertising and profit and corporate greed. So yeah, personally, I think that was one of the things that Cyberpunk got the best, was the idea of portraying a society that's kind of off the rails a little bit, and not unreasonably so, in the sense that we can see that it, some of those things might happen, could happen, heading that way, etc. So yeah, I mean, all the other things aside, like the fact that the game was broken at launch and had to be taken off the PS4 store, or the PlayStation Store in general, that all aside, I think that's one of the things that was really brilliant about the game.
Yeah,